Hey there, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Redeeming Time. I'm Pastor Vale of the Bible Believing Baptist Church located at 92 Center Road here in Gray. If you'd like to get in touch with us at any time, you can call, leave a message at 657-3773. Love to hear from you. Today we're going to be looking at Psalm 56. Psalm 56 is a very interesting psalm. The background of Psalm 56, you have to understand the background of this. David was on run for his life, but he was at the age of 20 years old. Now, though we don't misunderstand, David was 20 years old, and King Saul had literally pursued him right out of the palace, and he was seeking his life. He was out to destroy David. So from the age of 20 to the age of 30, David was a young man on the run. Now, David was a man who had promised to be king by God. God said, "You will be the king." And so now he's fled, and he's being pursued by King Saul, who wants to take his life. And imagine at the age of 20, you're on the run for your life, and you're fled. Now you can't go back and see your mother, your father, your brothers, your siblings, or any of the others, because they're suspect. If he goes back home to see them, then he's going to be in trouble and there as well. So no doubt people are watching him there. So he couldn't go back home. He couldn't stay there in Jerusalem in that area anymore. So here's a man who was on the run at the age of 20. And again, I say he was 20 years old, but a 20-year-old then was maybe a little different than a 20-year-old now, who has now been rejected here by the king and being pursued for his very life. They want to kill him. In this respect, David had already killed Goliath. David had already proven himself to be a mighty warrior. So he was a warrior. He was diligent. He was a tough guy. He could do what he needed to do. But at the age of 20, here he is at 20 years old. He's on the run. And now he goes to this place where he goes to stop to get himself some food. And they said, well, and he runs, and the priest there says, we don't have any food. So David convinced him into giving him some food. And he said, so he got the food, and he said, look, I was in such a hurry I left. I didn't even have time to get any weapons. Said, do you have a weapon? And he says, yes, I have the sword from Goliath, the giant that you killed. Do you have this sword? You can have that. And so that's an excellent weapon. I'll take that. So David takes a sword that he had from Goliath. Now, there was an Edomite who happened to be tending King Saul's sheep. And he saw David, and he went and he squealed on him and said, hey, David is over here. And so the word came back that David knew that he was being pursued again by King Saul, who was in hot pursuit after David. So David fled. And David fled to the place of Gath. Now, if you remember anything, Gath is a place where Goliath, the champion of the Philistines, lived, and he had 4 other brothers. So Goliath was no doubt a man who was highly regarded and respected in that community, and so David fled to Gath. And when he got to the place of Gath, it was found out there, and the other soldiers had found out that David was there, and as he is now brought before the Lord of Gath, that he brought before them, then the guy there was there. He looked at him and he said, wait a minute, some of the other military leaders said, look, this is David, the one who killed Goliath. What do we want with this guy over here? And they were not very pleased. And they said, you remember, the Israelites have sang this song. They said, David has killed his 10,000, Saul has killed his thousands, and David has killed his 10,000s. And so they weren't happy, for this guy was there in the very presence. And so now David is in fear of his very life. And it looked like that his life would be taken, because now he's in the hands of the Philistines, and he could be snuffed out at any moment. And so here he was there. And so what did he do? He got a brilliant idea, and he began to act like a lunatic. He began to drool at the mouth and scratch at the doors, and and doing some really crazy things. And then the king there said, look, get this lunatic out of here. And in order to spare my life, get rid of him. And now David played off the system that he knew, that their belief system of the Philistines. He knew that the Philistines believed if you came across somebody who was really a Looney Tune or something, whatever the evil presence that was upon them, that same evil presence, if you did harm to them, would come upon you. And so in order to deliver his life, he let him go, because he didn't want that evil presence upon him. So David was able to escape. Now, it was out of that background that we find Psalm 56. And Psalm 56, these are the principal things that you're going to find in Psalm 56. And I'd have you just to read it on your own, and I think you'll see these things. David, first of all, he begins with pleading for mercy of God in the prayer. He calls for mercy. He knows that he's not a man deserving of God's mercy and justice, but he pleads for mercy. So he has a prayer that is basically, this Psalm 56 is written after the fact, and I believe it was like a memoir or like a diary, and he's put down in print the things that were going through his life and his heart and his mind, the circumstances that he was going through there. And first of all, he acknowledges a plea for mercy, that he was not one worthy of the blessings of God, nor are any of us worthy of God's great blessing. So he appeals for God's mercy as he sets out to write to him, "Be merciful unto me, O God, for man would swallow me up. He fighting daily oppresseth me." And he goes on, "Mine enemies would daily swallow me up. For there are many that fight against me, O thou most high." So he begins by starting out, and he said, look, there's a whole group of people who are after me. They're always in pursuit of me. And I'm going to paraphrase the rest of the psalm, and you can pursue this on your own. Please do read it, but you'll have the background to understand it. He begins by talking about how that they had been twisting his words, everything that he said. They took what he said and they twisted his words. They plotted to destroy him. They were dogging his steps, and there was no rest from pursuit. They were constantly out to get him. But yet in the midst of it, he said he was not afraid. He did not fear. Why? Because he trusted in the Lord's word. He didn't know how things would turn out, but he knew it was going to be okay because God had given him word that he would be king. And 3 times or so in this particular psalm, he praised God for his word and for his praise and his word, the promises that God had given to him that you will be king, you will be king. So he knew that he could not be killed, because if he was killed, he would not be king. And so therefore he understood that he didn't know what was going to happen or how it would happen, but he would be king. And so in the midst of it, though they were pursuing him, they twisted his words, they plotted against him, they dogged his every step, he did not fear, but he trusted, and he found hope in the word, hope and assurance that he would be king, and therefore he would ultimately prevail. And he also noted in verse 8 in this particular psalm that God numbered his wanderings. He took note of all of these things, and he put his tears into a bottle, and they were in a book of remembrance. That God knew everything that was going on, and a book of remembrance was written down. He would never forget all the pain that he had gone through. And so he had assurance. This is a psalm. And as I looked at this particular psalm, I could say that therefore the response to this psalm, he said, he prayed for mercy. He recognized he was undeserving. 2, he prayed for deliverance with a sense of assurance that God was going to deliver him. And he praised him for the word, because his words, the promises given to him, gave him that assurance that he was going to be all right. And he had this assurance in verse 4 and verse 11 as to what is it that mortal man can do to me. Mortal man cannot thwart the promises of God. If I'm in the center of God's will, doing God's work, I cannot be stopped. And that's what he was saying here. He said, therefore, I will pay my vows. I will honor my commitments to you, Lord. I'm going to serve you. I'm going to praise you. And I know that I will walk in your presence. That is the essence of this particular psalm. This psalm. And what can I take from that? I can take from this that God sees everything that's going on in my heart and my life, and your heart and your life, and God sees and he knows. God sees the oppression. God sees the slander. God sees the distortion, and God sees the extreme scrutiny that people are placed under, verse 1, 2, 5, and 6. And God sees our pain, but he not only sees it, but he remembers every heartache and every pain that you and I are going through. And God becomes our place of refuge. We can flee to him. We can run to him and know that he is there. And God gives us assurance, and the assurance comes by his word and his advocacy on our part. And he said, why should I fear what man can do unto me? The Lord is for me. If God be for me, who can be against me? So please read this psalm, Psalm 56. Realize the background, a 20-year-old on run for his life, and taken in the hand of the enemy, but he has assurance and faith and hope. Why? Because he has the trust and the promise of God's word. Today, whatever issues that you and I may be facing, know this: God sees the oppression, God sees the slander, the distortion, the pain, and God sees the scrutiny. God is fully aware of our pain. He writes it down. He is our refuge, and he will give assurance, and he will be our advocate for us. Do you need an advocate today? Turn to him. Read Psalm 56, and may God bless you.